It only took one piece of trash to expose the difference between arrogance and discipline. A loud tourist in his 40s, red-faced, cocky, and fueled by a cheap sense of power, stepped too close to a royal guard outside Buckingham Palace. Tourists were everywhere, cameras already rolling. He wanted to be a star. So he laughed, crumpled up a snack wrapper, and threw it directly at the guard's chest. It hit, fell to the cobblestone. The guard didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't even breathe, it seemed. The crowd chuckled, unsure whether to be impressed or ashamed. And then he moved, one step, slow, deliberate, and deadly quiet, the kind of step that didn't need shouting to send a message. Phones lowered. Laughter stopped. The man who threw the trash suddenly stood very, very still. He thought silence meant weakness. He had no idea what that silence was holding back. Before we show you what happened next, tell us where you're watching from. And stay for the moment. Discipline spoke louder than any rage ever could. Corporal Marcus Lane had mastered stillness long before he ever stood outside Buckingham Palace. At 40, his posture wasn't just trained, it was earned. Years of elite military service, including missions he still wasn't allowed to talk about, had taught him the kind of control most people would break under. He wasn't just a royal guard. He was a former Special Forces operator, a strategist, a father, a brother. And more quietly than anything else, he was a grieving man. His younger brother, Jordan, had been murdered in a racially motivated attack 7 years ago. There were no trials, just news headlines and silence. And ever since, Marcus had learned to live with rage the way most men live with breath. Constant, contained, never released. People who passed him thought he was just another soldier in a red coat. They didn't know that every shift he stood was another day. He chose not to explode, not to speak, not to let the weight of what he'd seen and what he'd lost leak through the silence. Because that's what discipline meant to him. Not just standing still for tourists, but standing still for the people he couldn't protect, the ones he lost, the brother he loved. He didn't wear that uniform for applause. He wore it because stillness was the only thing left that didn't betray him. And every time someone laughed or waved or danced in front of him, it just made him breathe deeper, stay calmer, stand taller, because he knew something they didn't. Stillness doesn't mean peace. Sometimes it's just the only place left where pain can survive without breaking you. Gareth Whitmore had always mistaken volume for power. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't dangerous. Just one of those men the world had let grow mean without consequences. 44, loud-mouthed, slightly drunk, and brimming with the kind of false confidence that only grows louder in tourist crowds. He had gone viral once, some cheap airport rant about delays and rights. That taste of attention never left him. So when he arrived at Buckingham Palace with a cheap snack in one hand and his phone in the other, he wasn't just sightseeing. He was hunting. "Let's see if I can make the statue blink," he laughed to his followers. Comments rolled in. Encouragement, dares, mock applause. That's all Gareth ever needed, an audience and a moment. He got louder with each step. First came the taunts. "How's the weather up there, soldier boy?" Then the fake salutes. Then he pretended to trip and spilled crumbs near the guard's boots. Still no response. He grew bolder, testing the boundaries. Spit hit the stone a little too close. No one laughed, but no one stopped him either. That's the worst part. The crowd didn't cheer, but they didn't stop filming either. And Gareth, drunk on a mix of ego and internet adrenaline, went further. He crushed the wrapper from his greasy snack in his palm, and with a smirk, lobbed it straight at the guard's chest. It hit with a soft thud, barely audible, but loud enough to echo through the crowd. Gasps, nervous giggles, phones zoomed in, and Gareth just stood there, chest puffed out, jaw tilted up, waiting to be famous again. He thought he'd won, thought he'd broken a man built to stand still. But what he didn't know was that the moment Marcus Lane moved, it wouldn't be for him. It would be for something far deeper. The rapper hit him square in the chest and dropped to the cobblestone, resting silently at his polished boots. Marcus didn't move, not at first. Not even a blink. To most, it seemed like nothing had happened. But those who were watching closely, those who understood the unspoken language of stillness, saw it. The way his jaw tightened, the subtle inhale, long and controlled, the way his right hand flexed just once around the stock of his rifle. He didn't look at the man. He didn't acknowledge the phones. But something had shifted, not in anger, in gravity. And then he moved. One step forward, measured, grounded, intentional. His boot met the stone with a sound that didn't echo, but somehow still thundered through the courtyard. Every voice around him went quiet. The laughter died. Even Gareth, who had been standing smug and puffed up, took a half step back without realizing it. The phones were still recording, but the energy behind them had changed. No one was hoping for a fight anymore. They were waiting for something else, something heavier. Marcus didn't shout, didn't break posture. He simply bent down, picked up the crumpled wrapper, turned, and walked toward the man who had thrown it. Each step carried decades of restraint, decades of pain, not one wasted movement. When he stopped, just inches from Gareth's chest, he didn't raise his voice or his weapon. He opened his gloved hand and pressed the wrapper into the man's palm. That's all. No lecture, no threat, just a simple return of disrespect wrapped in impossible dignity. Then, without waiting for a reaction, he turned around and walked back, slowly, silently, until he was once again standing at his post, eyes forward, expression unreadable, as if nothing had happened. But everything had. Gareth didn't speak, didn't move. He just stood there, his smirk gone, his face pale, staring down at the crushed plastic in his hand like it weighed more than 1,000 pounds. He had thrown garbage expecting a reaction. What he got instead was a mirror, because Marcus didn't respond like a man looking for revenge. He responded like a man who had mastered a kind of strength the world no longer understood. And for everyone watching, that one step, that one walk, that one returned piece of trash was louder than any fight they'd ever seen. The silence that followed was unlike anything Buckingham Palace had experienced in recent memory. No cheers, no applause, no laughter. Just a crowd standing perfectly still, like they were afraid to break something sacred. Tourists who had been filming lowered their phones one by one, some without even realizing they were doing it. Others stood frozen, eyes flicking between the royal guard in red and the man now holding a wrapper like it was a live grenade. Gareth tried to shrug it off, tried to smirk, but something in the air had shifted. There was no noise to hide behind, no camera tricks or quick edits. The silence that Corporal Marcus Lane had mastered for years was now holding the entire courtyard hostage. And for the first time in his life, Gareth felt what it was like to be the loudest one in the room and still be completely outmatched. Within hours, the clip exploded online. 35 million views before midnight. News anchors debated it. Social media lit up. The reactions weren't funny. They weren't divisive. They were reverent. People weren't just reposting the footage. They were studying it. Martial arts instructors broke down Marcus's control. Military veterans shared the video with captions like, This is what real strength looks like. Parents showed it to their kids. Teachers brought it into classrooms. Even critics of the monarchy admitted this wasn't about royalty. It was about discipline, grace, quiet authority. Somewhere in a thread buried under thousands of retweets, a former comrade of Marcus's commented, "He's been through worse than that rapper. He's buried brothers. He's held the line in places the cameras will never see. That man didn't flinch, because he's already stood through hell." And suddenly, the story stopped being about the trash. It became something much bigger, something heavier. People started to realize what they had witnessed wasn't just a soldier following protocol. It was a man choosing restraint in a world that rewards outrage. It was a man returning disrespect, not with violence or ego, but with a gesture that said, "You will not drag me down with you." And that was what made it powerful. The palace gave no formal statement. They didn't have to, because Marcus had spoken louder than any spokesperson ever could, and he hadn't said a single word. As for Gareth, his video was taken down, his travel blog shut off comments. His apology, when it came, was weak and late, buried under a caption that read, "Didn't mean no harm." But by then, the world had already moved on, not with outrage, but with something worse for a man like him, indifference. Because once you've seen a man pick up your insult and hand it back to you with dignity, there's nothing else to say. The internet wanted to know more. Not about the man who threw the trash, he had already faded into the background, but about the one who stood still, the one who moved with precision and power, and said more in silence than most could in a lifetime. His name surfaced quickly: Corporal Marcus Lane. A few quiet veterans' forums began sharing pieces of his story, just fragments at first. A profile here, a photo there. But soon, the full picture began to form. Before the red coat and the ceremonial stillness, Marcus had worn a very different uniform. British Army, Special Reconnaissance Regiment, deployed twice to Afghanistan, once to Nigeria, another time to a location that wasn't even listed. His file was classified in parts. What could be shared was enough. He wasn't just a soldier. He was the man they sent in when diplomacy failed, when danger was real and silence was survival. A man trained not just in combat, but in emotional control under fire. But the most defining part of Marcus's history wasn't found in a mission report. It was personal, buried in a London community news archive from years ago. Man dies in racially motivated assault outside pub. No arrests made. The photo attached was blurry but familiar. The victim, Jordan Lane, Marcus's younger brother, the only family he had left. Marcus had just returned from his final tour when it happened. His brother was killed while walking home alone, after someone shouted at him from a passing car. Witnesses were silent. CCTV footage failed, and while public anger spiked briefly, it faded quietly. No justice, no closure. Just another headline. That was the day Marcus stopped speaking off-duty. He joined the Royal Guard not for tradition, but for discipline, for silence, for a post that didn't require him to perform emotion, but to contain it, and he carried his brother with him in every moment of stillness. In every breath he refused to waste. In every insult he endured without blinking. So when Gareth threw that wrapper, it wasn't the worst thing Marcus had been hit with. Not even close. It wasn't about the wrapper. It was about every time someone disrespected the uniform, not because of what it represented, but because of who wore it. That trash wasn't just litter. It was a test, a dare, a provocation thrown at a man who had more restraint in his left hand than most people had in their entire lives. But Marcus didn't move out of anger. He moved because some things are too sacred to let slide under your boots. He moved because silence only holds power if you know when to break it, just a little. And when he handed the wrapper back, he wasn't just cleaning up trash. He was returning a lesson. The world now knew who Marcus Lane was. But Marcus didn't change, not in posture, not in pace, not in silence. He continued his duty like nothing had happened. Same stance, same uniform, same calm. But everything around him had changed. The tone of the crowd, the way people approached the gate, the way tourists lowered their phones now, not out of guilt, but out of respect. Children stood on their toes and whispered questions to their parents. And those parents finally had an answer. That's what dignity looks like. Meanwhile, the man behind the insult was unraveling. Gareth Whitmore's identity spread almost as fast as the video, not because people were hunting him, but because his own social media was full of evidence. His face had gone viral before the palace ever released a word, and when he tried to backtrack, uploading a shallow apology video filled with excuses and half-smiles, it only made things worse. He called it just a joke, said didn't mean no harm, but it was too late. The internet had already moved past outrage. They had turned to reflection, to mourning, to something deeper than scandal. Sponsors dropped him. Tourism groups blacklisted him. But it wasn't cancel culture, it was consequence. For once, the world didn't punish him with noise. They punished him with silence. What hurt him most was that the man he tried to humiliate never said a word about him, never mentioned his name, never gave him the fight he wanted. Marcus Lane's silence had done what shouting never could, made him irrelevant. The palace remained quiet until 5 days later. Then, without ceremony, they released one sentence to the press. To return insult with stillness is not weakness. It is the highest form of service. No name, no drama, just truth. And that truth echoed further than any viral video. It made the nation pause. Schools talked about it. Offices shared the clip in hushed meetings. Military families reposted it with pride. And somewhere deep in the Ministry of Defense, someone quietly recommended Marcus Lane for commendation, not for action under fire, but for upholding the values of the crown under direct public provocation. He didn't swing. He didn't speak. He just moved once, and reminded the world what real strength looks like. The cobblestones outside Buckingham Palace hadn't changed, but the way people walked across them had. They moved slower now, quieter, more aware of the figure in red and black standing motionless at the gate. Marcus Lane stood just as he always had, shoulders squared, rifle held steady, eyes focused forward, but the silence around him wasn't the same. It had been rewritten, not by force, not by command, but by a moment, just one, when a man chose dignity over reaction, when he returned insult with presence, and in doing so, reminded a noisy world what it means to carry pain without passing it on. The tourists still came. The phones still rose. But people began filming with something else behind the lens. Not mockery, not curiosity, but reverence. A man had stood still after being hit with garbage. And somehow, in that stillness, he had delivered a kind of justice that couldn't be edited or explained away. No trending audio, no flashy captions, just silence. And a lesson that lingered long after the crowd went home. A week after the incident, a small envelope appeared at the base of the palace gate. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a note written in a child's handwriting. Dear soldier, thank you for standing still. My dad says you're stronger than a superhero. Marcus never acknowledged it, never flinched, but when the guards changed later that day, someone noticed the letter was gone, folded, tucked quietly into his coat. He hadn't spoken a word to the man who mocked him. He never corrected the headlines or explained the silence, because he didn't need to. Real power doesn't announce itself. It just stands there, unshaken, until the world finally understands why. Have you ever seen someone stay calm when every reason told them not to? Have you ever stood your ground, not with your fists, but with your presence? Tell us below, and share this story with someone who still believes that true strength isn't measured in volume, but in silence that refuses to break.